Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Gaming Daddy channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. So today I'm going to be bringing you a build that I've finally gotten around to using. This is the Rigor gear set. So those of you who know, I take my time and I run one build for a long time. And so finally I've gotten over to running the Rigor the way that I want to run it. And I'm looking at this gear set going, this gear set unlocks so much opportunity. The amount of build variations you can go with this thing is actually very interesting, and you really have to trust the skill aspect of it, which is pretty much all the buffs that you're going to be getting, and you really have to enjoy it. Now, the way that I play this gear set in legendary missions is I'm looking for straight up skill damage with it, and in many instances I'm looking for a way to be able to get as much as that skill damage from some really quirky skills. And when I say quirky skills, these are skills that you may not necessarily see in legendary missions. Now, sometimes you see a little bit too much of them, and they're not necessarily for players who really know what they're doing. You'll understand that if you're going to be using the artillery turret, depending on a legendary mission, you may have to swap from time to time. So you see me swap between the artillery turret and the assault turret. And then you're also going to see me swap to the jammer pulse. Now, you're probably wondering, like, what kind of weird scenario is that? Well, sometimes you find yourself in a situation where, you know, it just makes sense for you to use specific items. Like here, I'm using the oxidizer, which is a very strong portion of this build. But one thing I've learned about the oxidizer and, you know, the way it needs to be used is it requires a lot of patience. Now, we're going to go ahead and talk through this build, and I'm going to just, from time to time show you guys some of the footage from the legendary mission that I have on record today, because this mission really did rock. I mean, the way the build came together really worked in my favor and also with my team's favor as well. I didn't want to be, holding them back, so I'll tell you why I used some of the why I made some decisions in building the entire thing. So let's look at the items I have. I have a Rigor mask, chest piece, gloves, and a pair of knee pads, and I have a Wyvern Backpack, and I have the Waveform Holster. Now, all of these are set to just grant me skill damage easily. The Waveform Holster is a skill tier based holster. It has skill damage and skill haste. I would love to get the max roll of both of these. I'm still trying my best to get a better Waveform Holster, so when I can craft one or when one drops from me, you guys will be the first to know. I'll be slapping it on my builds without any issues. The Wyvern Backpack is also designed to straight up give me 10% skill damage without any questions asked. And I get it, Empress International, 3 pieces could pretty much resolve this particular build paradigm that I want to go for. But Rigor was in mind, and I wanted to kind of see how I can get everything and extract the best out of this particular build. I'm also using a capacitor. I think this is the first time that I'm actually showing a build using the capacitor in the Division 2. Wow, it's the first time for everything. Now, I've had the capacitor for a long time, and I've actually been using it for a while too, but I wanted to get very comfortable with it because it only has 41 rounds, and it doesn't really feel like, some of the other weapons that I use to kind of crank up, my skill damage, because the capacitor grants you the capacitance, the name, shooting enemies build stacks to a cap of 40. Each stack grants you 1.5% of skill damage. After 5 seconds, the stacks decay 1 per second. So for each skill tier that you gain 7.5% weapon damage. So that's actually pretty generous. It's a very solid weapon, if not one of the best weapons in the game. And it's actually guaranteed. So I know a lot of people are saying, oh, we'd love to get these weapons and all these other weapons. You can go to the summit and finish the requirements to be able to get yourself a guaranteed capacitor. And that's how you're going to get it. It's a summit weapon. You go in there, you do some activities. It will grant you 1 per your agent per, one per agent or something like that. So go get a capacitor as quickly as you possibly can. It does a very good job and hits a lot of damage too. Now, the beautiful thing too is my secondary weapon is the weapon that comes with the perfect strike talent. It's called the Surge, and what it does is headshots will grant me 25% skill damage for 15 seconds. Now, Surge is an OG talent in the Division 2 post Warlords of New York, and it's still very good. 15 seconds for your skills to just be cranked up, dealing 25% skill damage. That is insane. Now, we're going to look at the way all of this synergizes, and I'm going to show you guys pretty much some opportunities that I wish I could explore, but I'm limited by the drops or the items that I do have. So first of all, let's look at the Rigor brand set bonuses. 2 pieces gives you 15% skill haste, 3 pieces give you 15% skill duration, and then the 4 pieces gives you 10 and befriend, which says interacting with your deployed skills grants the skill 25% skill damage for 10 seconds. This buff cannot be refreshed. So interactions include using or deploying the skill, interacting with the skill or targeting the skill, changing the skill target if you're trying to maybe shoot like a Chem Launcher, or even healing the skill depending on what situation you are. So if you come to think of it, this is something that really does highlight, everything that my playstyle fits when I'm playing a lot of the legendary missions. I like to use a lot of skills. I like to tinker around the game. This is why I actually play the Division actively, because it gives me the opportunity to just mess with all kinds of stuff. I'm using my Jammer Pulse. I'm using my, my Chem Launchers. That's exactly what I need to be able to proc the talent. So in a sense, even though Empress International kind of does a really good job for automation, Rigor actually provides me a more personalized playstyle. So there is that sense that this might be the adopted build for another few months until we get our, Division content coming down the road, which would be really interesting if hopefully we get a level 50 cap. I'm going to make a video about that later on. And then, with my waveform, I also have alternating current, which is also a very interesting, skill damage stacker for you, because it says you generate a stack of 3% skill damage on one of your skills every second, capping at 10 stacks. After 10 seconds at the cap, the stack transfers to your other skills and the process repeats over and over again. So this constantly gives me a, consistent buff of somewhere around 30% skill damage if I let the stacks actually, pile up. And that's actually pretty good. I can't complain about all of this wonderfulness. And then I'm also using Shock and Awe here, which is a decision that I've made in a tactical way. Now, I'll tell you why I'm using that. So bear with me. This is a Wyvern Backpack. It's got 10% skill damage. It also has, for one of its attributes, another 10% skill damage. And I'm using, in my opinion, Shock and Awe because if you apply a status effect to an enemy, you get a total skill damage and repair by 20% for 20 seconds. Now, ideally, I should be using, if I'm using my artillery turret, this backpack should be, no doubt, a China Light backpack with the perfect Shock and Awe. There is no question that that's what I should be using. But I don't have one on this character, so it's quite annoying. Also, another thing too is because I'm constantly switching away from the artillery turret from time to time, I don't necessarily feel too much of that impact. Now, what do I mean? For this particular build, I'm using the regular turret, the assault turret, and I'm also using my Jammer Pulse as well as my Chem Launcher Oxidizer. So how are you going to be using 3 skills? Well, obviously, the Jammer Pulse and the turrets are going to be on one skill slot because they have a faster cooldown than your Chem Launchers. So I'm constantly switching between 3 skills on one particular slot, depending on the encounter that we find ourselves in. So say an example like this portion of Capitol Building. Ideally, my, Chem Launcher and Jammer Pulse are pretty much the best to go with. Because for those of you who don't know, the Jammer Pulse, when you're stacked with skill damage and all, your Jammer Pulse really does have a very huge AoE. In fact, sometimes I would find myself going underneath the stairs to activate, the pulse. I mean, it's insane. It's a weird thing that I do, but a lot of people don't necessarily know that it's something you can do and it can affect the enemy NPCs. You go under the stairs here and you just activate the pulse and it will literally jam a huge AoE, and catch anything that's within that affected area. So that's one thing that this game does have that I find myself using. So enemies behind walls, enemies behind structures, enemies that are trying to stay inside of a healing zone, you can always use your Jammer Pulse to continue to disrupt them. Even in this particular hallway, where we usually use one door, one of the best things you can have, because you have these healers that come out, is to have a Jammer Pulse that can pretty much temporarily disable the support station. You do that and your team members say they have like a turret that's trying to melt an enemy NPC, it will pretty much disable the turret for a little bit and also damage any of those kinds of, mechanical devices, drones, and all of the above. And it's nice to be able to have, that stack of damage if at any rate, you have the 50% damage stack, that's coming from Rigor, and then have something even close to another 50, 60, 10%, maybe 20 extra percent from your waveform. You've stacked your damage so way high that it's absolutely worth it. Now, the one thing that I would say too is, try as much as possible, or what I do in my own cases, I try my best not to worry about where the stacks are as I'm playing the mission. I just gonna play the mission because I have all of the tools available to give me stacks from everywhere. Now, it would be nice if I could stack the capacitor's damage. It'd be nice to be able to stack the waveform. It will also be nice to be able to stack the shock and awe, and also, maybe surge or whatever it is. But once you swap weapons, those stacks disappear anyways. So in that sense, what that tells me is I have all the tools I need. I just have to use them as I'm going through the mission. And if I remember, and if anything falls into an opportunity, then perfect. I go for it. And, that's pretty much the benefit of that. And if it doesn't fall into place, I still have some things that are automated that are still going to grant me a whole bunch of buffs without even, bothering myself. So that's one of the benefits that I enjoy about a build like this. It works for somebody that tinkers a lot, and for somebody who's tinkering and, may not necessarily get all of what they need to tinker with, it still does a good job. There's nothing wrong with that. If I go out here, I can still melt enemy NPCs with ease, without any problems. It's not gonna be a big deal. Enemy NPCs are still going to be melted. I'm not gonna really miss them. I'm gonna be happy that they're done and gone. So that's one of the beauties of a build like this. I'm getting all my buffs here, but in many instances, I don't usually get that. I don't really get the luxury of that, but I'm still not necessarily too worried about that because, I still have everything that's working for me, if you get what I mean. So this is what I believe this build is designed to accomplish, if you were to ask me, when you actually build with it. Now, when it comes to improvements and when it comes to, better making the build to work for my own purposes, what could be done better? And I think that's one of the best things about build videos is we talk about things that could be done better in these particular instances. And it's very simple. That backpack that I mentioned is going to have to get to, deliver talents that do a bunch of really good work. So in any scenario anyways, let me just put it this way. If I'm in a scenario where I have a skill that can do a really good job, say I'm using the assault turret, ideally, I'm going to want to have a backpack that has the talent called skilled. And if you have skilled, what that would do is that will add 25% extra damage to your skill after every skill kill. That's a very good way to go. Because if I take out an enemy NPC, that's perfect. If I want to use, say, the artillery turret, I could say, okay, let's go with the China Lab backpack, and that would also work. And combined arms may also be a beautiful thing to use. That also grants me 25% skill damage as long as I'm shooting an enemy. So depending on the scenario I find myself, say, at the end of the Capitol building mission, when you guys are hunkered down over here and you guys have like a heavy coming over, right? Your skills are facing the heavy, you're directed at the heavy, and then you can start shooting the enemy. You're gaining the stacks from your capacitor, and then you're also gaining the stacks from shock and all. That's something that could really work for you. Now, in my case here, I didn't necessarily do that because obviously I didn't have, combined arms. I still had my shock and awe. And so that's one instance where I do see that there's an opportunity to be able to make changes to a build like this and improve it. But at the end of the day, you as the player will still have to define why in the world you want to run a brand set or a gear set like this, and why you want to run the skills that, actually do complement your play style. Not every skill is going to benefit from this, to be very honest. And some skills you have to do some more work to actually make them viable in your in the way you actually play with, the missions. But I do know for certain that a Chem Launcher is actually quite viable in a scenario like this. Now, let's talk about the Chem Launcher. And I know this video is actually dragged on long, but you have to address these things. Chem Launcher is not everybody's favorite. And the reason is because it requires a lot of patience for you to be able to deal a bunch of damage like you would love. The cloud damage is actually pretty decent, but once you're buffed and once you're stacked up enough, it does a really good chunk of damage. The only thing is enemy NPCs are quick to jump away from it and dive and just, disappear. But take into account that because of their movements and constantly trying to avoid the cloud, you can actually use it to the benefit of your team. You can use it to actually expose all of the enemy NPCs when they're out of cover. That is exactly what you need. So if you have somebody with a turret, if you have somebody with a drone, if you have somebody with an artillery turret or a sniper turret, you definitely want to have something that is constantly getting enemy NPCs out of cover. That is not a one-time Seeker Mine explosion type deal. Seeker Mines would do the same thing, but you have to wait for a cooldown for almost everything. And I get it, you may be using hardwire, so that may not necessarily be a deterrent, if you get what I mean. But with a Chem Launcher, you can pretty much do that. You can also reach enemy NPCs behind barriers. If they're behind a wall or cover, it doesn't matter. Once you fire the thing, you know, the Chem Launcher, its cloud is pretty much going to penetrate through any barrier. It doesn't really matter if they're hiding through, you know, behind a wall. Another thing is, if they're hiding from you, you can also kind of use an AoE version of it. Basically, you can fire it close to where the enemy is, and if they're within range, then most definitely you're going to enjoy the fact that you can still get them, regardless of them hiding or whatever it is. And so these are some of the benefits of using the Chem Launcher, in my opinion. And I know it's a lot of work for one skill that is probably not going to feel satisfying, but the way I love playing this game is kind of different from the way everybody does play the game. But at the end of the day, it falls down to our discussion on how you would run this gear set or how you would run this setup. And I would always say, let me know how you're running your Chem Launcher builds, or if you're running Rigor, how you're running it. I would love to, test out your ideas, because, one of the best things about this game is I just always want to learn what the community is doing. So I have some suspicion that somebody will give me some crazy combination that's going to blow me away. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for watching the video and taking time to actually listen through all of this. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section, and hopefully we'll talk in another video. Peace out.